Let's talk about all the roles in your marketing team, the weak spots that I always see in organizations. I want to talk about the lack of strategy in marketing. I want to talk about how to mess up a hire for a marketing director role or a CMO role. The lack of strategy traces itself back to a few fundamental problems. Let's talk about how to build your team for leadership, how to build your team for growth. And I think that let's go top down and talk about all the roles in your marketing team, the weak spots that I always see in organizations. And the model we'll use is an organization that has a CMO, and you may have the CMO responsible for development, website, automation, things like that, technology. Maybe there's an e-commerce piece to it. My background is mostly B2B, so marketing is supporting business development, but there could be a lot of automation there too. There's a lot of opportunity for that. There's PR, there's some different areas, but I want to talk about the actual creative thought leadership. What's central to the role of that CMO? There are smaller companies where you're just worried about leads. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you have your leads, you kind of have that figured out, but you've long since gone from just startup survival mode to being a little more like, no, we're thought leaders and where there's value that's beyond, because we want to make more margins per sale. We want to have a lot more thought leadership. We want to mean something to people so that when they show up, they're actually getting something of value. They trust us. We're thought leaders. We are a consultant that they trust. We're not just some vendor. And a place where they want to pick their customers and clients and deal with the right ones, the ones that don't cost them a ton to work with because they're so hard and costly to work with. So I'm talking about is that more mature organization that's like brand, thought leadership, these things matter, right? We don't want to keep having to prove ourselves every single time we meet people. We want to send that message that says, hey, we're confident, we have processes, we can fulfill what you need. In fact, we'll go beyond that and help you know what you need. So we're not talking about just survival mode. We're talking about having a swagger and actually having the ability to go out there and win business, to support sales in ways you can't in survival mode, to support margins in a way you can't in survival mode. All right, so let's talk about what it takes to do that, because it's not just you hire some marketing expert or whatever and they just do it for you. Let's talk about the roles and the big mistakes in each role. So the kinds of thinking you need for each role when you hire. The CMO is going to be your most important position, and you might call it a director of marketing or whatever, but the person has to have some influence, the ability to affect the budget, to interact with the big picture. You're not going to get this from a junior person. You want someone who's strategic, but what does that actually mean? Because there's, people are like, oh, here's the difference between strategy and just planning. But the way I think about it is a planner knows how to do something the way it's always been done. They know best practices. They've done it before. Maybe they learned from somebody. They just know how it works. A project manager is a planner. They don't have to be imaginative. They can be, but they don't have to be. With a CMO, you're talking about someone who's more strategic. The difference is that a low-level planner is going to slap a plan onto whatever situation. If it looks like something they've dealt with before, they're going to slap that same plan on to solve the problem. A strategist is going to say they're more of a philosopher of situations, and they're looking at the situation and they're saying, okay, here are the really important things we need to look at, and they're different for this reason, and we need a process that exactly maps to the situation we're in. We don't want to try to map the situation to the process because that's just illusional. The situation does not map to your process. Your process needs to map to the situation. Now, a lot of times you don't need that because at low level, we're standing up a website. Well, there's a process for that. There's a really good process that involves strategy, a sitemap, wireframes, designs, so on and so forth. But at the strategy level, what you're trying to do is say, we can't do things the way everyone else does because we're not like everyone else. Our message is going to be different. Our media plan is going to be different. Our media strategy, because our strengths are different. And because our audience is going to be different because of our strengths being different. It goes back to that larger thinking. Where are we positioned? How do we think about ourselves and how do other people think about us? To where when we give them our message, it's really easy for them to understand and to buy what we're selling. Because really in messaging, you can only sell so many things at once. It's kind of like education. You teach a kid math, you have to teach them the basics first. If you can take a student and find out where they're really strong, you can move them much faster through the education process. In the exact same way, marketing is like education. If you can understand where they're at, then you can understand how to speak to them in a way that'll be most effective for your relationship. The most advanced level, and that's going to delight them. It's going to be interesting to them. It's not going to be like the normal message they hear. It's going to be highly relevant to them. And this is where messaging strategy, which is, I think, the absolute most neglected and most, like if you paid attention to it, it would be so fruitful. When we talk about strategy, we're talking about people who get much closer to the actual situation than someone who's just a planner who's just like, I have a solution. The strategist is like, I have a problem. The low-level planner is going to say, the problem will fit my solution because that's the only thing I have. I have a hammer. Everything has to be a nail. Where a strategist is, the tool that I have is curiosity. It's the ability to map a situation and really understand it well, including its nuances. What makes our company different and how do we maximize that? And what makes our audience therefore different? And then how do we maximize that relationship and get the most out of it? This marketing person, this CMO has to understand systems. And the most important system is the vision, the CEO's vision. That means they have to be conceptual. They can't just be someone who has to see the numbers first. They have to be able to say, okay, this is the direction we're going, that the CEO is taking us. The leadership is to be a kind of first follower in the marketing realm. They may have to be able to coordinate with a COO who may be second in command, and they have to say, okay, good. So the CEO says we're going this direction. The COO is saying how we get there, and the CMO may even report to the COO, but certainly coordinates with the COO and has to understand that. And then they have to be able to apply it. Now, the problem you run into oftentimes is you have people coming from other companies, and then they come in, and again, they're more planners than strategists. So they come in, they see vision, they see the CEO's how-to, and they're like, well, I'll just do what I normally do, and then just kind of like adapt it to that, right? Kind of create like a little API or a little interface and smooth things over. And you got to watch out for that, because there are a lot of people who go through their career smoothing things over, and they're not really direct. They're not getting you exactly what you need. They're indirect. They smooth things over and make it seem like what you're asking for is being done, but it's not. You have to be careful, because I've run into some people who they seem like they're smoothing things over, but really what they're doing is they're just kind of controlling their area, and they're actually doing a good job. They just know the COO and CEO won't completely understand it until they see it. And you take responsibility for that, right? If you mess up, if you're the CMO and you mess up, you're going to take responsibility for that. And they're going to say, that's not what we asked for. But for the most part, if you're good, you are doing what they asked for. You never tell them everything, right? So you're controlling the information they get, taking the worry off their plate, and you're taking responsibility for it. You got to be careful that smoothness doesn't replace strategy. Going back to strategy, I'm already solving the problems. We talked about strategic, we talked about systems just now. And one of the systems has to be your company from where you are upward, understanding the long-term vision. And another thing about that is that I ran into this idea because I was trying to describe this. And there's this idea of this Platonic idea of forms. What Plato, as I understand it, was dealing with first principles. The forms were first principles, things that don't change no matter who you're talking to. You know, like there are some first principles of humanity, but then there are different personalities downstream from that. But there are first principles that are true for every person in the world. Like we need to eat, we need love. Think of Maslow's hierarchy, right? You know, basically survival all the way up to self-realization. There are these things that are true for everybody, but then there are personality things and the things that we apply to their life situation or what they're thinking about right now, or what they're going through. An athlete might have more of a sense of accomplishment than someone who's not an athlete or whatever. So you have these things that are fundamental to humanity and then things that are downstream. In the same way, a strategist is going to be someone who understands the basics and ties everything back to those first principles, those basics, to where we can know these things. But then there are other things we can't know. So now this is where a lot of times you run into the difference between Western philosophy, kind of a philosophical point of view, where you have the analytical. Analytical, think of C.S. Lewis, who dealt with the very basic first principles, or G.K. Chesterton. These people from outside of our time were dealing with the same things we're dealing with today, but just outside of our time. Very interesting to read. And you have that kind of analytical philosophy. And then you have empirical, where you're actually going out and you're doing tests. And it's called empirical because empirical means like based on experience. Empiricism is like, okay, how do we set up an experiment and then see what actually happens? And so analytical should hold sway over empirical, because empirical can be a lot more deceptive, where philosophy, if done using very basic first principles and basic laws of non-contradiction, then you have a really good understanding of what you can know and what you don't know. This is critical because it makes us humble. Let me give you an example of not humble. Let's say you have a beer company and you're catering to men, and you hire a female to lead it because she understands culture. And she graduated from whatever university and they want to promote her. They're super excited about it. Everybody's like, wow, she really gets it. She knows her target audience and everything. Two things are at play here. One of them is, does she understand a male way of thinking, assuming their strategy is to win more of the male beer drinking audience rather than go after women? So part of this is, where are you going? You want to hire the marketing director or the CMO who is going to help you get to where you need to go next. And that's different CMOs during your process. One CEO's tenure might have several COO as well. All right. So you don't have to be one of the audience members. It can help you to have some objectivity, because someone who thinks they know the audience can get very arrogant. So you have that too, right? But the other thing is you have to have humility. You have to be able to realize, like, here's what we can know and here's what we can't know. Now, in education these days, now you can take my word for it, I have limited understanding. I went to the University of Oregon for my undergrad and master's degree, and then I taught for 4 years. What I saw there was a lot of postmodern ideas, and I think they're aimed at changing politics, but they don't understand the impact of that thinking on your work. And what happens is, if you think that what you think is just going to be true, if you have enough confidence about it, then you're going to go into life with the wrong assumptions. They're not going to be empirically based. They're not going to be very analytical. They might be a little analytical, but what ends up happening is companies look at marketing like this black box. And COOs, finance people, they're like, I don't know, marketing is so foreign to me. And they feel like they can't understand it. And part of it's because you're hiring frauds to run your marketing. It's no mystery why you can't understand it. It's because they're not explaining it because they don't understand it. And they don't deal in reality anyway. We hire this type of person and there's no accountability because we don't understand marketing. Well, guess what? Marketing is science just like everything else is, and you can understand it just like you can understand everything else. The problem is that when we get into these situations where there's weak philosophy, we have weak leadership. And there's a limit to how far you can go with weak philosophy. Weak philosophy is just whatever I want, right? And so if we don't understand it, we can't hold them accountable. Then they're like, yeah, well, it's whatever I think is true, and I have swagger and I have confidence, so let's do it. And then your stock price drops like a rock because you didn't understand how to hire a marketing director or a chief of marketing. All right, that was a little deeper in that area than I thought I would. All right, so strategic. And there's a lot more I can say about strategy, but let's deal with cognitive styles right now. They know the big picture. We talked about that. So they have to be able to know the big picture, where you're going. They have to know the roles on the team, and they have to understand those roles. If they don't understand creativity at all, then they're not going to be able to effectively run a creative team. They're not going to be able to support creatives. And if they don't understand strategy, then they're not going to be able to support strategists. So even if you hire a really good person who has a lot of knowledge, great resume and everything, but you don't know why they were successful, you may find that they weren't successful for the right reasons. And so they lack some of these insights into the creative process, into strategy, how to do strategy, how to support strategy, how to sell strategy. Because strategy is not design, it's the workflow that leads to great messaging. But it's one of those things you have to do. Everybody wants to take the test and pass it and get an A. Nobody wants to study. And so it's a lot easier for people to, if they don't understand research, to not prioritize research. They don't understand the value of good qualitative research, good quantitative research, good internal consistency in the plan. This is where we're going, lining everything up, the long-term goal, the audience we're going after, and how they're going to help us get there, and how we're going to help them by the product or service we offer, and how all these things fit together. If they don't understand, they're not going to understand the importance of research, for instance. They've never seen research benefit the whole big picture. It's going to be very difficult for them to want to do any research. They just don't have any faith in it. They know intellectually it's a thing. It's probably on the list. They're probably supposed to do it, but they don't really know what benefit it's going to give them. And so if something gets cut, they're going to be very quick to cut research to the detriment of the product or service that you're selling in the company as a whole. And so you can have a lot of arrogance when you have people. So there's this biblical concept of eldership. In a church, you have elders. One of the requirements is they can't be brand new. They just can't be new people to the faith. And so there are a lot of people who are like, well, God can do anything. Cool, he can. But specifically in the Bible, he tells us, right? If you believe that, he says that don't promote someone who is super young. And part of the problem with that, and what I've seen is, I want to see people who've gone through the fire a little bit, and then they came out stronger and better. Not more cynical, not more manipulative. They've come out better and stronger. And in a church, you're talking about character. You want the utmost in honesty, the utmost in truth, forthrightness, the utmost in love, the utmost in this desire to build this thing that will by God. When we're in business, we should demand the same things from our CMO, right? Demand the same thing from our strategists. Honesty. They've been through the fire. They have battle scars, and they passed the real tests. And they came out desiring to be more honest and more loving and caring about the company, because that's your long-term legacy of that brand. The Bible also says a good name is better than riches. Branding is not just this manipulative thing. It's a good name. So obviously they have to be able to manage a brand. We'll talk about what they have to be able to do later. Proportional thinker. They can think about big concepts before knowing the numbers. So it's very much like high-level finance. If you look at a company, you look at ratios, not just the numbers. If someone's like, I run $1 million company, it's like, okay, that's not enough information. What was it before you took over? Was it more or less? Did you grow it or shrink it under your watch? When I was at Resound, we had an up year and a down year. We needed ratios to tell how well I did with operations and cutting costs, because my role was profit, right? Primarily. It was a branding agency, so I did a lot of stuff, marketing and everything. But primarily it was, hey, return on revenue growth. Was it good and why? There are other ratios too, depending on how you're set up, but you want to know ratios. You don't want to know absolute numbers. If someone's like, yeah, I had $1 million in sales last year. It's like, okay, well, how much did your friends have who also sold with you in the same department? More or less? How many did you have the year before that, right? I want to know, compare it with something for me. These conceptual thinkers need to be able to think. The higher you go in strategy, the fewer knowns that you have, the more unknowns you have. You need to be able to compare concepts and put them in proportion to one another. Even if you don't have the numbers yet, you have to be able to weigh things and proportion things. And so when you see people in the world and they have different points of view, even though they have the same information, one group properly proportions what they know and the other group has mixed up proportions. They all have the same information. One thinks this is important and the other thinks the other thing is important. And being right about that is what makes you right about things, not how smart you are, not whether you have a PhD. It's whether you can think proportionally, whether you anchor the proper proportions as the independent, where do you measure from? You have to have information to measure stuff. You have to have details to measure things against other things. A conceptual geometric thinker goes through life looking at core patterns. So it's much more like the analytical philosopher, like C.S. Lewis and Chesterton, and a lot less like the empiricists. Now, the empiricists give us good information. It's just not the core information. To interpret empirical results, you have to understand philosophy. You have to have an analytical approach. And you have to either say, For instance, an atheist might not have much of an anchor. They might have just the cultural things they grew up with, and they're like, this is right because this is right. Whereas a Christian might say, well, God created the universe. Here's why he created it. Here are the principles that he gives us in the Bible that we can understand and make sense of. And they're focused on those things. And you get Western civilization, right? And so that's the importance of having your assumptions, knowing what they are, and then having them. It's called epistemology. It's basically the study of how we know what we know. Good. Geometric thinkers. Yes, that's what we just talked about. Very Platonic, by the way. Okay, so what are the mistakes? One of the biggest mistakes is someone who only understands the culture. So when I was a grad student, there was another grad student who was called a strategist as well. They called me a strategist, and I was like, we are so different. This strategist was aware of culture, delighted by culture, loved culture. This guy, a nice guy, was so delighted by culture, and I never heard him talk about strategy. And I remember thinking, this guy's not a strategist because he's not thinking strategically. He's not ordering information based on what we know. He's not asking intelligent questions based on what we know. He feels culture deeply, and he has a way to talk about it. Now, he's going to be someone who could work for a big corporation. He can work for a big corporation and understand where they're going and say, okay, pay me a lot of money because this is what people do. I actually confronted Simon Mainwaring on this very topic personally after he gave a talk. I was like, dude, I talked to him. He didn't want to talk to me after that because I'm just like, dude, you're full of crap, basically. And but he's the kind of person who could be like a Mainwaring, and he could basically say, okay, Coca-Cola, give me a whole bunch of money, and I'm going to tell you how to get in front of this woke parade of homosexual pride, and I'm going to show you how to get in front of this, and I'm going to make it look like you were leading the parade the whole time, right? Super manipulative, disingenuous, just like people pleasing, not based in reality, not based in what's good for people, not based in making the world a better place. Half the time, I think people aren't trying to make the world a better place. They're trying to make the world a place for themselves. And I think we all have examples, no matter where we come from, no matter what background we have or view we have on politics or religion. That's a mistake I think people can make. So now you're a company that maybe has a backbone. And I hope that's who I'm talking to. Otherwise, this is irrelevant. But you're a company with a backbone. And what you're looking for is you have a grasp on truth, and you want to bring on a CMO who's going to help you to do that even more, not less. They're not going to want to dilute it. They're going to want to buy into and double down on it because they believe in it. Think of yourself like a firearms company. You could be a firearms company and probably pander to a group of people, right, if you want to. Now, a lot of 2A people are very, 2A. So they're very conservative, maybe libertarian. They believe in hard work, more blue collar in their thinking. Even if they're white collar, they might be blue collar in thinking. So you're going to have a particular audience you're going after, but you still have to be careful. You have to be careful that you're not just like, oh, I understand the culture. I watch war movies and I understand the culture and I know that men are this way or whatever. There are certain things about men that are fundamental that'll never change, right? There are certain things that are never going to be compromised among men. And if you don't fit into that, you're going to be rejected by that group of men. Same thing with technology. You have people who are more engineering minded, and there's a certain culture there. Cybersecurity, a bunch of guys with tattoos and hackers that are white hat. You can understand these cultures, but there are certain things that are foundational to humanity. There are certain things that are foundational about cultures and then subcultures downstream from them. You have to be able to parse these things out and understand them. It's very simple, but people don't understand it. They don't feel like it's simple. And I think the marketing industry has done a sucky job at helping executives understand how to understand marketing. We all know the classic dynamic or phenomenon. You're an engineering company. There's a good engineer, so you hire him to be the head over other engineers. The skill that made him a good engineer is not the same skill that will make him a good manager of engineers. Sometimes it works. There's a lot of respect there and everything, but sometimes it doesn't work because the skills are different that are required. And so in the same way, you have someone who understands culture in your organization, someone who's a junior marketing executive or something, and they really understand culture, but they don't understand what they don't understand. There's an arrogance that can build up there. And so you end up hiring someone who can understand culture. as a strategist. They don't have strategy skills, kind of like this guy I was talking about, doesn't have strategy skills, but understands culture. You're promoting them to a strategy role and they don't know how to do strategy. They don't know how to do research. They don't know how to question their assumptions. They're really arrogant. Maybe they don't even know it. They're not an arrogant person. They're just arrogating to themselves this knowledge that they don't really have. And so that's when you run into like a Coors Light situation or even Cracker Barrel. Just like, who are we? And are we going to go out of business if we do this thing? Have we talked to anybody about this? And have we asked the right questions? And I think out of all this, the research is the most nuanced because you have to be able to understand qualitative research, how to set it up and how to make it objective, even though it's qualitative. Another mistake you can make is hiring a manager to be a CMO. They're a good manager. They keep things in order. Let's go through the manager. Let's say they're the account manager. Maybe they're someone who works with departments within your organization to create content for them. That account manager is good with people, good at negotiating things. They make people like them. A lot of times these people are people pleasers. But then you get them in an executive role and they're still people pleasing and trying to make everything nice. They're not contributing to the strategy conversation. They're not helping you grow your understanding of truth. Instead, they're just people pleasing, trying to smooth things over. That's another mistake, hiring these people to be leaders. The creative director's job is to understand the contemporary aesthetic. They need to understand the aesthetic of the groups you're talking to, right? Let's get beyond the normal stuff people are used to seeing. Let's do a little visual competitive analysis and try to find out what's going on and then elevating that and advancing that. And so they're imaginative, but they're not necessarily, sometimes they're looking for aesthetics that apply and can advance the industry. They know how to keep to strategy. They don't have to know how to create strategy. They just have to know how to keep to strategy with their creative work. Now, a lot of times these CDs started out as copywriters, and so they're a lot more conceptual. The copy is where you see the real creativity because the concept might come from the copywriter. It could come from a designer too. And it could come from a designer copywriter team that's good, that consistently produces good work. There could be some good philosophy and theory that comes through here that ends up being strategic. Now we get to the strategist on the team. So you have, again, you have CMO, then you have the manager or the account manager, but then equal to them might be the strategist or account planner in advertising. But it's the person who is like the message. We need to get the message right. So they do research, they build a brief, they might do a competitor analysis, they might do target audience research and recommendation. Then after that, they write the creative brief. Because the creative brief is how you package all that up. You make all the strategic decisions so it's clear and clean and linear, and then you hand that off to your client. The next thing is the media strategist, and this person can be a strategist just as much as the messaging strategist. They just have a different domain they work in. But the media strategist could also advance in the organization as long as they're a strategist. Remember the difference between a strategist and a planner. You can have a planner who does a good job in that domain, but once you get up to the high levels, they're not moving you forward because they're planners. They're going to do things the way you've always done them, and they're not going to understand your big vision. They're not going to be able to think systematically and strategically, and they're not going to be able to line everything up from the top down to the company's vision and goals. This is the marketing department. Now think about hiring all these people to be your CMO. The creative director has good aesthetics. Are they going to be a good CMO? Not if they can't do strategy. Not if they don't have a good hold on philosophy. You can't do strategy without being able to do philosophy and think geometrically, think in proportions. The manager, account manager, I didn't even mention the project manager. Project manager could be strategic as well, but you don't know that just by virtue of them being a project manager. They could just be good at low-level pattern recognition. They might not be a strategist who can see the big picture. The account manager could be a people pleaser. They could never be a good strategist. You have to know that they can do that and not just be a good people pleaser. The strategist, even a strategist on a creative team, if they're not a good strategist, they know a strategy process and can work that process out. Qualitative research, quantitative research, doing competitive analysis, they can follow a formula. The target audience recommendation, they can follow a formula for that. The creative brief, that's much harder to do because you really have to know your stuff to write a good creative brief. But you could write a creative brief. It doesn't have to be good, right? And you're not a good strategist because you're jumping through the hoops. You've learned the process and now you're just doing the process. Not super intuitively, not with a lot of understanding. And the same thing with the media strategist or the media planner. You can come up with a media mix of here are all the places we need to advertise and post in order to do this. I asked ChatGPT and it told me this is what you do. And then here's the budget because I asked ChatGPT and I showed them my budget and it helped me to divide it up. And then even measurement, right? Measurements, like here's the standard measurements for this kind of thing. What you need to have is a CMO who can make sense of all that and hold it all accountable and know that from top to bottom, things are being gradually and consistently, incrementally grown to resemble the kind of creative team that can do this job for this company, for this audience in the absolute best way possible. And that's exciting. You have strategy, you have measurement, and now what you're doing is you're trying to measure and troubleshoot your roles, your strategies, your processes, and bring those all into subjection to the company's goals. If you can do that, now you found a CMO who can understand. They're going to fit your organization because they're going to fit what you're trying to do. They have the skills that are going to take you to the next level. And I think those are the biggest things that cost in that CMO role, the biggest things that cost companies. I think we just went over. Hope you found this helpful. And if you have, I want to know because I want to know feedback. I want to know exceptions. I want you to argue with me in the comments so I can argue back, so we can build philosophy and understanding because that happens through conversation. Let's build some better companies that are serving the world well.